You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, episode 529, In the Flesh.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Norman Lau. Each week on Mission Log, we explore Star Trek, one episode at a time, looking for the morals, meanings, and messages, and trying to determine if the whole thing stands the test of time.
This week, In the Flesh, the one where we have a relaxing trip back to Starfleet headquarters, except it's not really Starfleet and it's not really relaxing when you determine that probably everyone there wants to kill you.
John will be right back with trivia after I tell all of you how to reach us. Mission Log is a conversation about Star Trek. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on X and Facebook at Mission Log Pod. While you're at it, leave us a review and a rating at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. And please remember your comments could be used on Mission Log or Engage on the Roddenberry YouTube channel. And now here's John Champion, or so he says, with this week's trivia.
All right, we have an episode, In the Flesh, written by Nick Sagan. And I hope you all recognize that name, and not just because he was credited as a writer on 2 TNG episodes, Attached and Bloodlines. Nick is the son of the late Carl Sagan, and among his many other writing credits, he pitched to Star Trek pretty often. This story, like most others, took some radical changes from concept to finished product, though. At one point, we had kind of an ancient aliens thread with species 8472 having visited Earth in the past, and then we had a much more action-oriented, effects-heavy treatment that got pared down in the interest of budget. Brandon Braga had a heavy influence in ramping up the drama and shifting the focus from space battle to conference room. This was directed by David Livingston, back, of course, so much work from David all over Star Trek, and the most recent of his episodes that we discussed was just 2 weeks ago with Night. And we love our real-world locations. I always like to point those out. And the Tillman Water Reclamation Plant in Van Nuys is again heavily featured here as Starfleet headquarters, modified certainly in many shots with matte paintings. They even lifted some shots from prior Star Trek, including Star Trek V. Now let's meet our guest stars, and we're referring to them here as their human character names, since presumably their species 8472 names would be much harder to pronounce. We barely get to know Ensign David Gentry, but he is played by an actor you may well recognize from a hit movie. That's Zach Galligan, who is best known as Billy in Gremlins. And while he has worked consistently ever since, he even returned to the franchise as a voice in the 2023 animated series Gremlins: Secret of the Mogwai. Admiral Bullock is played by Tucker Smallwood, and you may very well have already recognized him. Even though we're still a ways off from covering Enterprise, he does have a prominent role in that series' 3rd season. But even before this, Tucker has had numerous roles in genre projects. You've seen him in Space Above and Beyond and the movie Contact, appropriately mentioned here since that story was written by Carl Sagan. He's done a lot of comedy, too, with recurring roles on Seinfeld and the Sarah Silverman program and Malcolm and Eddie, to name just a few. Kate Vernon plays Valerie Archer, and Kate is probably immediately recognizable here since she is so well known to sci-fi audiences from her role as Ellen Tigh in Ron Moore's Battlestar Galactica. Kate got her start in the early 80s with the occasional guest role on shows like Family Ties and Dallas. Then you may have caught her in recurring roles on LA Law or Nash Bridges. More recently, you may have seen Kate on The Morning Show on Apple TV+, or reunited with BSG co-star Katie Sackhoff in Another Life. Finally, it's so nice to see Boothby again, or at least an alien doing a perfect impression of Boothby. He can be played by no other than Ray Walston, here making his second of 3 appearances in the role. We mentioned him back when we covered The First Duty on TNG, and we discussed his long career going back to the mid-1950s. He might still be best known for My Favorite Martian or Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but Walston racked up more than 150 on-screen credits in his time and kept working right up until we lost him at the age of 86 in 2001.
Welcome to the Delta Quadrant, new home of the Alpha Quadrant. I'll explain later.
Prologue. At Starfleet headquarters in San Francisco, it's business as usual. Boothby attends to his gardens, and Admiral Bullock welcomes new officers to their assignments. In the distance, though, all of these moments are being captured on a holo-emitter, a detailed study being made in secret by Chakotay? Act 1. Boothby, the groundskeeper, soon encounters Chakotay, who seems a little like a fish out of water. He's not sure where to go, but his story about being new here after an assignment on the Intrepid seems to hold up. Boothby points him to the logistical support office. After snapping a picture together, of course, Chakotay enters the Starfleet building and heads for the Officers Club. There he meets Valerie Archer, a friendly and somewhat bold officer who is reading a book on Vulcan logic while enjoying a Klingon martini. Chakotay introduces himself as Jason Hayek. In another part of the lounge, a young ensign begins to violently morph, his skin stretching and straining before a couple of others can escort him out of there. Valerie then drops the Starfleet talk for a moment and addresses Jason, asking if he has ever reverted. Chakotay plays it cool by saying not yet and asks if she has. Valerie replies that keeping her human form isn't as much a challenge as alien concepts like sleeping. As they set a date to continue the conversation, Tuvok enters and gets Chakotay's attention. They have work to do, and the two excuse themselves from Valerie, who still invites Jason to join her later. On the way to their beam-out location, Chakotay confides what he has learned. These Starfleet personnel are aliens, posing as such. Why? He doesn't know. But they are soon interrupted by a young officer who points out that they are headed toward a restricted area. With no time to argue the point, Tuvok renders him unconscious, and the three beam up to the Delta Flyer, which is just in range of wherever this place actually is. When they materialize on the Delta Flyer and head back to Voyager, Harry Kim asks what they found down there, referring to the large space station from which the three just arrived. Earth, replies Tuvok. Act 2. That Starfleet ensign who is incapacitated by Tuvok now finds himself coming back to consciousness on board Voyager behind a force field in sickbay. Janeway confronts him about his identity, but the guy just keeps spouting off Starfleet rank and serial number. The doctor moves in to take a DNA sample, but the ensign becomes more agitated and suddenly drops to the floor, having released a toxin into his bloodstream. The alien is dead, and the doctor will do a post-mortem to determine who or what he is. Meanwhile, data is coming back from Chakotay and Tuvok's reconnaissance. The space station is a highly sophisticated simulation of Starfleet HQ, populated by all manner of Alpha Quadrant species. Could this be a prelude to an invasion? As a precaution, Janeway has moved Voyager to a spot out of range, and that's a good thing when the Doctor unravels the mystery of exactly what this alien is. The genetic resequencing is reversed, and the human figure before them transforms into species 8472, a big, dead one. So why are they going to such lengths to simulate Starfleet? Tom Paris suggests a corollary from history, the time the Soviets built American towns to train KGB agents to infiltrate the U.S. This could be the Delta Quadrant equivalent of that. Whatever it is, likely that 8472 are making good on their threat to wipe out every living thing in the galaxy, and Voyager needs to be prepared to stop them. Chakotay suggests that he go back to keep his date with Valerie if that will add to their intelligence. It goes without saying, but Janeway says it anyway. that Voyager has no way of warning Starfleet, and they may be the last line of defense against an all-out invasion of the Alpha Quadrant. Act 3. Before Chakotay heads off for his date with Valerie, Janeway and the Doctor make absolutely sure that he and everyone else on Voyager is indeed who he says he is. With all of Starfleet HQ being recreated, one can't be too sure. While he's gone, Seven and the Doctor will continue work on defenses against 8472 by replicating more Borg nanoprobes and testing them on the alien corpse. Chakotay is prepared for his rendezvous with his own weapon, a nanoprobe-firing phaser, as well as a tricorder modified to pick up some of the 8472 computer systems. He arrives for his date. Boothby is there giving some advice to Valerie when Chakotay appears. The two hit the town and then wind up back at her place, where the discussion turns to the benefits of human existence. Art, literature, music. She's genuinely interested in humans, but Valerie also notes that the Federation would eliminate anyone who is like them. She steps away, giving Chakotay a chance to make some scans of her computer. When she comes back, their conversation becomes a little more pointed. Chakotay questions the plan to infiltrate the real Starfleet, but he calls it a night before they can debate the point much further. Then Valerie insists on a kiss goodnight, and Chakotay gladly reciprocates. As soon as he leaves, Valerie scans the DNA trace he left behind from their embrace, and she immediately calls Boothby. He's human, for real, and security is alerted. Chakotay tries to make his way out of Starfleet HQ and back to the beam-out point, but he is soon surrounded and outnumbered. Act 4. Back on Voyager, Janeway is preparing for a fight, ordering weapons converted, and indeed ordering 7 of 9 to pull more Borg nanoprobes from her own bloodstream. At the same time, she's wrestling the Starfleet directive to avoid military confrontation, to work for a peaceful solution with new species. But that's when she gets a hail from the Delta Flyer that Chakotay is in trouble. And he certainly is. Boothby and Valerie interrogate him, asking about the Federation's presence in the Delta Quadrant, and Chakotay, of course, denies any plans to invade the quadrant or antagonize 8472. Just then, Voyager approaches and charges weapons. The Delta Flyer is damaged, but on its way home as Janeway orders 7 to target the weapon systems of the 8472 base. On the base, Valerie has turned much more cold toward Chakotay and extracts some of his DNA for further research. But all the while, Chakotay makes the case that they are not there for a battle. If only they would talk directly. Then he busts out a little George Bernard Shaw, something he saw on her bookshelf, noting that keeping secrets is what will perpetuate this heightened distrust. Boothby hails Voyager, and Janeway answers. The 8472 weapons are powerful, but Voyager is armed to the teeth with Borg-enhanced weapons that could devastate them, just like they did a year ago. Boothby takes pause and asks Janeway what she has in mind. She says, a class reunion. Act 5. As it was asked before, guess who's coming to dinner? In the conference room on Voyager, Boothby, Valerie, and Bullock sit down to hear out Janeway's insistence that Voyager is on a peaceful mission and the Federation is a principled organization with no intention of conquest. They have a hard time buying it, but Janeway does something radical to make her point clear. She orders 7 to disarm their weapons. Now it's up to Boothby and the rest of 8472 to decide what to do next. Attack or keep talking? Boothby asks Janeway what she wants, and again she assures him that Starfleet has no plans for an invasion. In fact, they have no idea that 8472 even exists. Voyager is alone, and they haven't been in touch with home in over 4 years. Bullock is less willing to hear it, but Valerie spills the beans. 8472 are preparing an extensive recon mission, but not an invasion. Bullock is outraged, but Valerie reinforces that what she has seen of humanity is that maybe they aren't so violent. Maybe, as Chakotay suggests, this is an opportunity for first contact all over again and to get it right this time. The negotiation proceeds with 8472 asking for a look at the nanoprobe tech and Janeway asking for schematics of their genetic resequencing. So a truce is achieved. Next step, friendly diplomacy. While Seven was and still is a bit skeptical, Janeway and the crew are invited down to the simulation, Terra Sphere 8, where they are given tours and an exchange of technology is underway. Janeway seems to genuinely be enjoying this little simulated taste of home. Boothby says he'll do his best to extend the channels of diplomacy to his superiors, but he's not sure if all will be receptive. As a peace offering, he presents her with a rose, replicated, of course, like the real Boothby did for Janeway back on Earth. And elsewhere in the simulation, Valerie tells Chakotay that she's looking forward to returning to her true form in fluidic space. But this experience certainly had its upsides. He tells her that she made a terrific human, and while a second date might be out of the question, she does take a final opportunity to experience a kiss with Chakotay. The end.
Fantastic recap, John.
Thank you.
I'm glad that, we're recording this, so I didn't actually watch you record it in the flesh.
Right.
But
yeah.
Kind of not, but, we understand what's happening here. So.
Well, I feel like my human impression was pretty good. So, if anybody has notes, though, you just let me know, and I will definitely improve my human impression later on. So
you make a terrific human, John. By the way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, you know who else makes a terrific human? It is so great to see Boothby and Starfleet. Obviously, the whole premise of Voyager is that we are nowhere near there, but how cool is that to open with this total left field thing? I thought that was great, and I love it that even on this simulation, when the weather is nice, just, everyone takes their meetings outside. That's the way to do it.
It's nice that they use Boothby and Starfleet Academy at the Water Reclamation Center.
Yeah,
in a way, just kind of settle you in, but you're still uneasy, but it's comfortable at the same time.
Everything about it works. Yeah.
I know that we've brought this up with the Doctor in a few episodes ago when he was taking pictures with his camera, quote unquote. It's clunky, but I dig the prop.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so down for that prop. I love that. It's just, you have to assume that there is a tremendous amount of technology in that. We have no idea what resolution, what depth, what other data it's capturing because it is so big compared to our super advanced phones that we have now. But I love that prop. I love the complexity of that thing. All right, we are introduced now to the Klingon martini. Vermouth, gin, dash of blood wine. Why have we not made this?
So you're a fan. You sound like it is something that you would be a fan of.
I don't know if I'd be a fan of it. I just want to know why we have not made it.
I think personally it sounds terrible, but we do have the means of doing that in real world cocktails.
Oh, look, we got blood wine. We know the guys.
Yep.
we got gin. We got vermouth. I'm not a big fan of vermouth. That's why I take things very dry. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Maybe the right balance can be found. Or maybe not. Maybe this is a terrible Klingon thing and the 8472 just have no taste.
That's true. That's true. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so is anyone in this Starfleet simulation where they're trying to perfect their appearances, none of them are going to ask Chakotay about the Maquis pin? What does that rank?
I still want to know about his Maquis pin. The Maquis are gone. Just put it away, put it in a nice display box, put it on a shelf, and leave it there.
Okay, so Valerie says, I like the tattoo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then she's like, but no question about the pin or his rank at all. But she calls him Commander.
Yeah, right.
So, all right, just one of those things. Mm-hmm. I do love it when she says, speak of the devil when she's talking to Chakotay, and then Tuvok walks in.
Yes.
Right? Because that goes all the way back to the original series, pre-original series, when Spock had the ears and the red makeup and
Yes.
the potential of being the devil that Gene fought hard for.
I love that. I love that. Back on Voyager, I had to wonder, does the Doctor not already have a sample of DNA from 8472? Like, there's a lot of technical stuff that we'll kind of maybe get to, maybe not in the next segment, because there's a lot of asks, again, that this episode makes of you. But I just wondered, like, could he not already tell that Starfleet dude was actually one of them? Or maybe even the transporter would pick something up and go, hey, you know what? This thing that we're beaming up, I know we're scanning for viruses, but guess what? This is also a dangerous thing that we're bringing on board. So
I wonder if it's something like, in Terminator, because the Terminator is covered with human flesh, the time portal couldn't distinguish between weapons. As Reese says, you can't bring weapons through the time machine, but you can bring a Terminator covered with human flesh. So I'm wondering if Ensign Gentry, in his changed form, was able to confuse the scanners and the Doctor.
There's a lot of questions about all of that. Just the whole premise, because, I mean, there's even the difference in mass. I mean, 8472 are huge, which, by the way, was a nice little morphing effect. I mean, it is, from our point of view now, a bit rudimentary, and the blanket didn't quite move right, But it was just cool to see not only does Gentry change, but he changes into this thing that is much bigger. And, of course, Kate plays it by, kind of getting knocked out of the way by his arm. I thought that was all pretty fun.
I dig Seven's astrometrics, that digital cross-section of San Francisco Bay and that whole Starfleet headquarters kind of panoramic view.
Yeah.
And also, this is a new uniform for Seven, isn't it? It
is. It is brand new as of this episode, and I can't remember who it was that said that it was the skater costume. Somebody,
skater costume.
Somebody on set said it looked like something that a skater would wear. But I think this keep making them a bit more comfortable for her. There is something, they bring this out. Of course, this episode has a lot of Cold War parallels, and indeed, to Tom's point, the Soviets built American towns to train their agents to infiltrate the U.S. See also The Americans, 2013 TV series, and the 1989 John Travolta film, The Experts, if you haven't seen that one in a while. Have you seen that movie?
Not in a while.
Okay.
No, right?
Yeah. Charles Martin Smith, Kelly Preston, John Travolta, a lot of good stuff happening in that movie. I like the way that Janeway is testing Chakotay, because when we come back at the top of the act and they're there in astrometrics, they are playing it so cool. And only when he says, are you testing me? Are you, right. Only then do you get it? Because a lot of times in TV, that kind of scene is played very over the top, and right away what's happening. This, I thought, was one of the best versions of that kind of scene.
Well, it's because it's hard to differentiate the scene from the flirting, because the flirting is so genuine and so good. I mean, Robert and Kate are really, this Kate, Robert and this Kate Mulgrew are really good at that. I can see why J. Sears read between the lines so easily, because it's there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Really nice scene. Also another nice scene, good bit of dialogue. The Doctor and Seven love their banter. Have you ever heard the phrase, the best defense is a good offense? No. I mean,
they are dynamite.
She fills those lines the way that Tim does as Tuvok. Certainly the way when Worf was at his best, when we're getting those types of lines. So good. Yeah.
So the scene with Chakotay, Tom, and Harry, and their dialogue. Can we now christen the Delta Flyer as the Club Bro Flyer? Right, because there's a lot of bro speak going on.
There is. Oh man, there is. Yeah, I almost got a little uncomfortable from that. Yeah. Speaking of uncomfortable. All right, Valerie just says it's Pon Far night at the Vulcan nightclub. What?
Yeah.
Hang on. Whoa. Time out. Stop the presses. What? First of all, there's a Vulcan nightclub. Second of all, that's just a night that they have. They just have a Pon Far. We went from Spock not being able to talk about this as being one of the most personal, deep secrets. And now there's literally just a club around the corner in San Francisco. and you can just go there. Hey, it's Ponfar night. Cool.
Right.
The future is great, man.
I mean, you have double drinks on Tuesday, you have bingo night, you have fish fry, and now
Ponfar night.
Ponfar night.
Yeah, exactly. You got to save that for a night when you don't have to be up early the next day, for sure.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, and then shortly after, though, you have Valerie says something. Chakotay is like regaling her with a tale. She says, "You're kidding. You were naked?" And Chakotay says, "Not entirely. I had my comm badge." And then she says, "I hope it was well placed." I mean, could the sexual tension between these two be any more telegraphed?
Bravo. If this were a two-parter with more of that, I would have watched it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely a throwaway scene when we cut back to the Delta Flyer and Harry and Tom are there. And, it's just kind of to connote the passage of time because Chakotay's been on his date all night long. But honestly, like I said, two-parter, extend this episode, just give me shots at the Vulcan nightclub or whatever. Give me the beginning of that story about the comm badge and beaming in naked. I mean, so much more that could have been done.
Is the Delta Flyer cloaked? Can it cloak, or is it just hanging out?
Okay, I've got a whole list of technical questions.
I'm just curious. It's right next to the thing.
It is. It's just right
and
there.
And they're just hanging out. Yeah.
They don't even bother. Sure. Like at this time in TV, you didn't really bother to try to connote a lot of distance. Like they would do that on Galactica every now and then. That was on my mind with Kate being in this. But yeah, where you'd kind of move things around, you'd have little tiny, tiny ships and really try to show scale. Yeah. I don't know. But I do know this. We go back to Valerie's apartment, and it's great. I love the split level. I love the sliding glass door, the whole thing. It's so cool.
Yeah, the production was great on this.
Yeah.
I had a question about when they kissed. I know that she did the DNA test, but couldn't her telepathic powers figure that out because she's 8472?
You would think. Think that, but then I guess there would always be the question, well, maybe he's an agent who's that good at being undercover,
Yeah,
not
maybe.
even telepathy could break him, Gotta say,
like a secret shopper, right, with the VHS tapes.
Yeah, he's that good.
Yeah,
he's that good.
You gotta sell those VHS tapes. Yeah. That's right.
As we close out that scene when Chakotay's running away, this is such a simple but such an effective shot. So when you shoot day for night, so if you ever look at a call sheet and see DFN or NFD, day for night or night for day, it's really hard to pull off, especially when you pull off night for day. But pulling off day for night, a lot of TV series in the 80s especially would do this. Like you watch Miami Vice, they couldn't shoot all night every night, so you'd throw a filter on the camera and you go out and you shoot all your nighttime scenes during the day. And sometimes it doesn't quite play because you can pick up shadows and you can pick up reflections and stuff like that. But in this, oh my God, is it good? There's the first shot we see, you get a lot of reflection on the water. And I could just say, okay, that's moonlight, sure. And then they switch right over to the daytime shot. Masterful. It's such a simple effect. It's a camera filter, but wow, was that good.
So this wasn't influenced in any way by Marvin Rush?
It's got to be. It's got to be his work. Yeah.
And
I imagine there's something in the script that just says, like, Chakotay is running in night, and probably you could have done it an easy way where you just cut the angle, then suddenly it's daytime. But if it was David or if it was Marvin Rush looking at this and saying, you know what we could do? We could actually accomplish this in a wide shot, in camera, and just cut the filter, and boom, we're good. Yeah,
yep, for sure.
So cool, so cool. And shout out to our man Boothby here drinking a 200-year-old single malt.
Right.
First of all, I want to know what it tastes like. Second of all, I want to know what it costs because, wow.
Yeah, that brings up the whole, how do they do that? How do they understand the complexities of a 200-year-old single malt? Do they replicate it? Can you replicate those types of alcoholic phenolics?
Yeah.
Maybe. This is what I get, bent out of shape about, right?
Yeah.
Isn't Chakotay kind of getting tired of attractive women sticking his neck with needles?
It's a thing, man. It's his bag, baby. That's,
one injection for your neck, signed by
right.
Commander Chakotay. That's not my bag, baby.
Man, really nice scene on the bridge. 7 of 9 saying, "The species does not deserve our compassion." Janeway saying, "You picked a lousy time for an ethical debate." My note here is that it was very good dialogue, but it is great delivery and framing. Like, you take a couple of lines that on paper it could seem a little bland or could have been overplayed, but the way they played it, the way they shot that, just superb. Also, speaking of dialogue, don't get sassy with me, young lady. When we've got Boothby in the room with Janeway, I love how Boothby is still Boothby. And it is hilarious, but wonderful. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that Voyager fans really had a kick of having Boothby and Janeway, interact in this scene, and then, of course, in person in the next act. I don't know why. I hear this all the time, though, when he says, "Don't get saucy with me, young lady." I hear, "Don't get saucy with me, Bernays."
Yes.
If you get that, like John got it, congratulations, you're as old as us, too.
Yeah. And then, speaking of Boothby being Boothby, Targ manure. I love it. There's something so great about, you have to wonder, in the reality of the show, some species 8472 adopting this character, but getting all the words right, getting all the lingo and the style and the delivery. It's a lot of fun.
So in that big conference room showdown, Valerie Archer says, "Our mission is to infiltrate your homeworld, to place operatives in the highest levels of Starfleet, and monitor your military installations. It's a reconnaissance mission, nothing more." That sounds really familiar to me. I'm not exactly sure when I heard that.
Nothing to see here. And by the way, in their negotiation, Janeway's negotiating with 8472, and they want to see the nanoprobe weapon technology. Sure, fine, okay, this is how we're going to have this détente. And then Janeway, her big ask is, we want to see your genetic technology. And immediately I thought, why? What do you want with that? This can lead to no good whatsoever.
Now species 8472 consists of silly putty people. That's not what I thought the fluid in fluidic space would be.
Norman, I kind of teased it in the last segment, and you had your own moment as well, talking about the tech in this episode. And I hate to use this section of the show, because when we arrive at this section of the show, it really is all about the ideas and the philosophy and the heart and the ethics and moral decisions. But sometimes, the tech is awfully fun. And in an episode like this, I feel like the tech is awfully fun because a lot of it relies on the tech.
So we're teching the tech right now.
We are teching the tech. We're going to tech the tech together, me and you and our audience. Because it's not the point of the episode, but there's just so much that hinges on it. First of all, I just kept wondering, how did 8472 get all of this very specific information from the Federation database? The fact that the Federation database would have that Boothby gave Janeway flowers, or or just his speech patterns and the phrases that he uses, or the types of drinks that are at the bar. I mean, all of this really detailed stuff. And when did they download the whole thing? Where did they get it from? And if they did get the whole thing in that much detail, couldn't they figure out how many Starfleet ships are in the Delta Quadrant? They wouldn't know that? Okay, but they do change themselves genetically somehow to be human or Vulcan or whatever, Bolian. We see Ferengi. We see a Ferengi in there somewhere. But I also wondered, when they're doing that, are their personalities intact as 8472? Like, do you have an 8472 species member who has their own distinct personality, their own distinct background, or are they just such good actors? Like, is this a trait that 8472 has that we don't know about? They are fantastic actors that they just can't help but stay in character.
Is John Lovitz in their planet somewhere?
Acting, genius. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And I also had to wonder, with all of that highly advanced technology that they have, they're not detecting Voyager or the Delta Flyer or people beaming in and out of their space station. It's a lot to ask the audience to buy this premise.
I think that's one of the stumbling blocks in this episode. I think that the Star Trek fans are very smart and they pay attention and they understand certain things, like everything that you've listed out so far. So when you're watching an episode like this, you can't help but get taken out kind of like of the asks, because you're asking questions like this that need to make sense, because they're too much of a swallow, right? To really say, okay, 200-year-old single malt whiskey.
Yeah.
Where does that come from in the database? Unless they stole a replicator from somewhere and downloaded that database. But from where? There's only one replicator. Well, I mean, unless they took the Kazons that, Janeway gave him early on in Caretaker. Maybe what if they kind of like cobbled together all of the Starfleet tech that has been littered across the Delta Quadrant, and this is what they did with it?
It would have been interesting to see things kind of gradually get wrong with their recreation. Like, you don't want to go as far as Living Witness, because we already did that story and we already showed how it goes off the rails. But it would have been really interesting to get little things wrong, that either to dramatic effect or to comedic effect. I think you could have played with that a bit, because otherwise it's almost too perfect, and that's why I have all these questions.
Well, we haven't done enough LDS, that's why.
That's why. That's exactly it, yeah. Mm-hmm. So the tech stuff is fun, but ultimately I think there are a lot of really interesting, thoughtful points being explored here. And I don't want to belabor them too much. I really want to hear your notes on this as well. But the first thing that came up to me is just a purely Star Trek style story about diplomacy at work, about being the first one to take your hand or take your finger off the trigger. And I feel like we've seen Star Trek many times before advocate for peaceful solutions. And in this episode, it feels like the stakes are even higher. That it isn't just about what will happen to Voyager, but it is about this misunderstanding, this miscommunication on a colossal scale that could lead to the eradication of every living being in the quadrant, but played out in this really intimate way. So the question that becomes, what do we do? Like, we have that choice to make. We have that ability to actually sit there at the table and decide to talk it out and take that higher road. I feel like I'm skipping ahead to the final thoughts, but I feel like this is such a germane part of the plot, such a germane part of the story here, that we kind of have to address it here as well.
Well, I think if they spent a lot of time inhabiting kind of like not just the outward appearance of Starfleet, but maybe what they've learned about Starfleet thus far, aside from, what they've learned at the end of the episode when Boothby says Targ Manure, Federation of Planets, a prime directive.
Right.
But they did understand literature. They did understand art. They did understand community. They did understand a lot of what makes humans, or at least the Starfleet organization, cohesive. So when you spend a lot of time thinking like something, you begin understanding something. It's kind of like acting. You understand the character, or you understand the motivation, and then you live in that space. Like Nana, in our interview with her, she said that it was dangerous for her sometimes because she lived in Kira's headspace for so long that she didn't know where she ended and Kira began, or vice versa. So what if that's happening to them? And what if, because Valerie is maybe susceptible to that type of change, is where the opportunity for negotiation was breached?
You're talking about truly walking a mile in somebody else's shoes, and I know that I've got a kind of a question to pose about that when we get toward the end of our discussion today, for sure. For sure. I don't mean to switch gears too much here, and we can bounce around from topic to topic, but I also am thinking about that scene between the Doctor and Seven of Nine. You know, I joked about it earlier when he asks if you've ever heard that the best defense is good offense, and she says no. But there is another interesting part of that conversation. So we have this. Literally, we have an arms race. We have those arms build up on Voyager, and Janeway is certainly justified given the past experience with 8472 and understanding their power and the threat that they pose. But I like that we allow the Doctor to be the one to express his hope for a diplomatic solution. Like, we don't always have to rely on Janeway to hear that, even though she expresses it very well in her follow-up conversation with Seven of Nine. But it was so interesting to me that the Doctor says to Seven, weapons of mass destruction were often designed in the hopes that they would never be used. Seven of Nine points out that they were. You know, yes, you hope that they're never used until they are. And she says it about World War III, which is our future prior to first contact, that 600 million people were wiped out from that. And, there's something really chilling about that, to hear that you have to put a limit on your optimism, maybe. I don't know how much of that is Seven being a pessimist, or it is just Seven seeing facts in front of her that are maybe unsullied by perhaps more of an emotional response from the Doctor.
Seven, we've credited her as being kind of like this beyond influence voice of reason because she came from the Borg, and she's kind of like understanding humanity as she sees it. I think she's just basically stating a fact that, like you said, they're only there as a deterrent until they're not. Yeah. So it's kind of like the doomsday machine, right? It was only supposed to be a deterrent until it wasn't. And there are different examples across Star Trek of a doomsday machine or an ultimate weapon that, where it's supposed to be the last line of defense until it's the first line of offense, right? And the only offense. That's, go all the way back to the first two atomic bombs, right? Yeah. It was supposed to be a last line of defense until it becomes an offensive weapon and turns into the nuclear arms race, which we were still, kind of like living under today in a way. Yeah. So I think that's a great social message, that the Doctor and Seven are talking about. I think it's smart that you're seeing this. And that's like one layer, of a very complex story that's happening. And I think I like that you proposed a 2-part episode. And I think that would be really interesting because I don't know where we're going to see more of 8472 again in the Voyager story from here until season 7.
Yeah.
And I have to ask, knowing what we know and what I brought up earlier in observations, is species 8472 the new shapeshifters in the Voyager story?
Could they come back as something else? Yeah.
Chakotay says to Janeway about not taking any chances about the interrogation, and, are you testing me? Janeway says, don't feel singled out. I've asked the Doctor to examine the entire crew. There's no telling how 8472 got their information about Starfleet. From the Borg? From Earth? For all we know, there's been an imposter on board. That's fair. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? We don't know.
Totally.
During the war in fluidic space in Scorpion 1 and 2, they could have snuck somebody on board. Yeah. And then they got on board with the Hirogen. Or Hunter and Prey. Mm-hmm. This episode aired on November 4th, 1998. Deep Space Nine was already well into season 7, its final season.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if Brannon Braga wanted to borrow some of this Dominion War energy and infuse Voyager season 5 with this kind of motif. Because you have the Deep Space Nine audience that is going to lose its series. What are you going to do with all of that? You have to be able to capture that audience and laterally move them to a series that doesn't have the same kind of numbers. What better way in the TV business to improve ratings that you take a captive audience and you give them a little bit of what they're familiar with, and then you build the momentum behind that. I think that it might, that's all speculation, but I see that as being a very smart move because for all intents and purposes, what Valerie said about, infiltrating the highest, echelons of Starfleet, those are the founders.
Yeah.
We've seen that story done before, right?
Right.
So,
right.
But I think the audience likes that story. So let's just give them a little spin on the story, right?
That's a cool idea. Yeah. I like this idea. We mentioned it a few moments ago with the idea of living witness. But I like the idea that 8472 has studied the Federation database. They've learned what the ideals are, but they also still see that the actions don't always live up to the ideals. Mm-hmm. And that is a cool way to explore this idea, because we've seen it happen throughout Voyager's journey in the Delta Quadrant, sometimes in these very big ways, sometimes in these much smaller ways where the consequences, where the actions have consequences. And it's this very tricky thing, and it speaks perfectly to the dilemma of Voyager being out there at all. It's like every step in the right direction still leaves behind this wake of potential destruction for someone else. I mean, we already had that in Hope and Fear. I love how we're dealing with the consequences of something that happened a year ago, and here we are still in this episode dealing with the consequences, again, more than a year ago, because you can't just do that. You can't just cause one side with millions and millions of beings to lose, to be, mortally wounded, and then expect that you just get to skip on out of here without ever hearing from them again. Mm-hmm. So I love that this is a show that has consequence, but is able to come at that consequence from a really odd angle. I think that's something that's effectively captured here.
Well, I like what you were saying earlier about how we're positioning 8472. Are we gaining any sympathy for them? And I'm wondering, are we humanizing the enemy in that traditional Star Trek way? I brought up this quote from Sun Tzu. Uh-huh. The quote is, "To know your enemy, you must become your enemy." And he continues, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle." So are we seeing this in the way that Chakotay is kind of turning Archer's sensibilities here, right? Mm-hmm. Because she's the only one who's really interacting with Chakotay in that way where they're both like kind of getting intel on each other.
Yeah.
But he sees like her bookshelf. She's well read. She likes certain cultures. She's a very cosmopolitan version of 8472 in a human form. Yeah. On their date, Archer said to Chakotay, "Human beings are quite a paradox. At first glance, they're so primitive, genetic impurities, no telepathy, violent, and yet they've created so many beautiful ways to communicate their ideas. Literature, art, music. At times, I've actually enjoyed being in this form. You must think I'm crazy." It's a fantastic scene, and towards the end of the episode, there's a nice bookend to it when Chakotay says, "There are no secrets except the secrets that keep themselves." This is when he's quoting George Bernard Shaw.
Yeah.
He continues, "As long as we keep spying on each other, making assumptions, we will probably go to war." So there's this really interesting pattern in Star Trek. I'm not sure if it's purposeful or coincidental, maybe both. So like the Borg, and then the Cardassians, and then the Founders, and the Romulans before them, and the Klingons before them. Isn't it interesting that all the main alien villains in Star Trek have all so far been humanized in a way where we can feel both animosity towards them at the beginning and empathy towards them when we understand that there is a commonality with all life forms if we really try, right, to work things out, to find common ground and talk things through, like you said.
I think you just led us to our next segment.
Is Starfleet really the best model to emulate? Just think, in a few years, Species 8472 could have their own Red Squad.
One of the things that we love doing here at the end of Mission Log is, well, pardon the pun, John and I aren't really in front of each other in the flesh, so to speak. But we have had an incredible discussion, and I think it's going to be even, pretty more robust, and make some finer points as we get into what we do at the end of Mission Log. And that is take a look at the episode and ask, does the episode hold up? Does it withstand the test of time? And then hopefully our final conclusions take us to any morals or meanings or messages that we may have found. So at least in your opinion, in your flesh, John.
Yes.
How did you feel about In the Flesh?
Well, in my, fleshy, what is it, mostly bag of water,
something like that, yeah.
Human form here, yeah. This episode, man, it is so bananas, cuckoo, crazy idea that I feel like I have to love it. I mean, when we talk on this show about high concept sci-fi, what we mean, in case anybody hasn't followed along with that, what we're talking about is those stories that make a big ask of the audience and usually have to buy into this very complex premise before you can get anywhere near the story or the character work, which ultimately is going to be the heart of any story. There are only so many things you're going to tell us, man versus self, man versus nature, So, but when you do sci-fi on this kind of a scale, there's all these huge conceptual hurdles you have to get past. Then you buy into the reality of what's going on. And that is not always successful. and it can very often just come across as very phony, just creating bizarre scenarios that don't ultimately serve the characters or fit the reality of the show. This episode succeeds where other shows attempting that might fail. I was just catching up with a friend the other night, and he was asking me about our journey in Mission Log so far and how the overall series coverage was going for Voyager. And I told him, because I was thinking about this episode as we were preparing for it, and I said, one of the things that I really appreciate is that Voyager is a series that isn't afraid to be weird, and it isn't afraid to take a swing for the fences when it gets weird. And what I'm about to say, believe me, I do not say this to put down DS9 in any way. It's just to kind of hold it up for contrast's sake, because that contrast became a lot more clear as I was thinking about DS9, and it sometimes lost that weird edge because it was relying on the stories of the prophets to kind of serve any need it had to get outside of basically a political wartime drama or a soap opera. These are the two main stories going on. So whatever level of weirdness you had, usually relying on this other thing that I felt like was not always successful. So now an episode like this comes along and we are firmly back in the weird camp with Voyager. And after all, it is Deanna Troi who said that weird is part of the job. So if you can get on board with all of that, and especially if you've been paying attention to Voyager all along as various species come and go and consequences catch up to the crew, there is a lot of payoff in this little nugget of a story. And as we will soon see, as we were discussing in the last segment, and as we will wrap up the show, there is definitely a treasure trove of Star Trek messages at the heart of this. And look, I gotta say, our guest stars are just fabulous, without fault here. Everybody is great in this. What about you, Norman?
Yeah, we're on the same page here. I love this episode.
Nice.
Like, in every way, except for its originality. But
oh, wait, what do you mean by that? Okay.
Okay, so I love the execution of the episode, and I love what it's trying to achieve. But I mentioned earlier that, the underpinning of this episode is firmly rooted in the premise that made the founders so fascinating. The ability to train and impersonate members of Starfleet, at the highest levels of power. That's what Valerie Archer said.
Yeah.
So that's where kind of my caveat of, not really original, storytelling or original ideas comes from.
Yeah.
And with the founders and the Dominion, that entire story arc was incredibly fascinating, and it was new. That's the heart of Deep Space Nine, pretty much, 3 through 7, seasons 3 through 7.
Yeah.
And that takes a little bit of the originality out of the equation here, but it doesn't dilute the message of In the Flesh. The message is what's important, right? Misunderstandings can and will take place between two species in a stalemate. So either war or peace are decided by who decides to, as Janeway says, trust faith that the peace process will yield its own reward. I mean, that is, it's a very clear, stark message, regardless of some of the trappings that may have been used from either other ideas or other series. And like you said, like from the nostalgia of seeing Ray Walston, as Boothby again, or seeing the Tillman, water plant in the Japanese garden as the backdrop for Starfleet, that's comfort food for us, for Star Trek fans. I mean, we see that, and that shortcut to there's something, again, like Janeway, it's very wholesome. Even if it's, synthetic, it's very real for us. Because we've seen it so many times.
And it doesn't get overplayed. I mean, by definition, it can't because Voyager is so far away. But when you see something like that, it has much more dramatic impact.
Exactly. You're trying to figure out what's what. Even like when Boothby said or Janeway said that Boothby advised some of the great captains like Picard, when you hear, those Easter eggs, they kind of make you perk up a little bit. And I think that this episode struck the right balance between Easter eggs and, kind of fan service for the right reasons. It helped, enhance the story. Now, speaking of enhancing the story, wow, Kate, right?
Yeah.
The other Kate Vernon.
Yeah.
And Robert Beltran just sizzle on screen.
So good.
Wow.
So good.
I mean, their chemistry is ridiculous. And it needed to be because it helps sell Archer's turn at the end about understanding humanity and her being the olive branch to kind of accept, Janeway's, test of faith. Yeah. I think you need to have that in order to tell the story. And I think that they being Kate and Robert sell that very well. So do I think that this episode's premise is wholly original? No. But I love it all the same because I think it holds up to the triple M's, which we're going to discuss right now.
Man, which I feel like we probably won't even get to all of them because there are a lot. So I look forward to the continued conversation in our Discord and elsewhere. Even if you're not part of our Discord and you email us or leave us a message on Facebook or whatever, I feel like there's a lot to say about this one. The few points that I want to hit, I'm going to go back to that conversation that Seven of Nine and the Doctor were having. And the Doctor is optimistic about the outcome. He's optimistic about a diplomatic solution, but he says again to her, the best defense is a good offense. And I thought, wow, is this one of our beloved characters on Star Trek justifying an arms race, which seemed really out of step for the character and maybe for the series as a whole. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, the reality is that all of these starships are armed. All of these starships are going into potentially risky situations. This is a wholly unique situation given the strength of this potential adversary. So neither the Doctor nor Janeway are out of step to want to be prepared. Because ultimately what it comes down to is this decision to let diplomacy win the day. It says, okay, I might have these tools at my disposal, but even if other people have used them in the past, I am not going to be the one to use this. I cannot be a barbarian today, as it were. There is also, we got into this a moment ago when you were talking about Valerie's character arc in this episode. And I thought that there was potentially this interesting philosophical idea being explored here by what the 8472 have done to themselves. They have literally reshaped themselves into humans. I know that there are other species represented here, but for the most part, we're talking about the humans. And as Valerie puts it, they have seen through human eyes. And I thought, is that what allows them to have the experience of humanity, just the physical transformation on this profound level? Now, granted, they did the homework too. They studied philosophy and art and music and everything else that is the intellectual, philosophical output of humanity. But at the same time, they could have just as easily reverted back to who and what they are as 8472. They didn't have to actually be human to study all of that information. So I was asking myself, is there something inherent in the physical experience of humanity that sensory perception, that vulnerability, physical and emotional vulnerability, the changes in emotional states that directly inform their outlook and even allow them to understand a more peaceful existence. I like to think that that's the case because it means that even at our worst, then there's still something inherently good about us, and that's about as Star Trek a message as you will ever get. There might just be something baked into the cake that allows us to be that way. And 8472 got a taste of that because they went the extra mile. They did walk in our shoes. And finally, this is an episode where there's, very little weapons fire. There's a very low body count. There is a scene around a conference table negotiating for interstellar peace. And this is the kind of thing that it is easy to make fun of Star Trek for, but I'm here to tell you it really works, and it is no less heartfelt and no less dramatic. Guess what? You can decide not to take the first shot. You can find creative solutions. You can look your enemy in the eye and decide that you will find humanity in them. And for as many times as someone else has cracked the Federation database and seen only the worst of human history, you can still make a case to do better, to live up to the ideals that we claim to revere even when we fall short. Final lesson of the episode, for me anyway, if Kate Vernon offers to kiss you, just absolutely do that, even if you think she might be species 8472. That's a free takeaway from me.
Lesson learned.
Okay, good.
That's my takeaway.
Good,
sure.
Good.
Right,
What else you got for us, Norman?
So, John, you and I have, we've really kind of landed in the same space because when I was looking at this one scene in the final confrontation between Boothby and Valerie Archer and Chakotay in the conference room scene, Valerie Archer says, "I've had a chance to see through human eyes, and I'm beginning to wonder, are they really so violent? What if we're wrong?" Mm-hmm. And Chakotay says, "Archer's right. We've got to set aside our preconceptions about each other. Granted, our species didn't meet under the best of circumstances, but maybe we can make first contact again. Maybe this time we'll get it right." I mean, you can go all the way back to the original series Arena, and that's exactly what Kirk and the Gorn were trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Right? What if I was wrong?
Yeah. Right.
What if we did encroach in their territory? What if we attacked them first?
Yeah.
Right? Now, we know the history has gotten a little bit convoluted since then, but the premise of Arena is kind of like what we're talking about here. So I want to switch fandoms for just a second to Doctor Who, specifically Peter Capaldi's Doctor Who. In the 2015 episode, The Zygon Inversion, there's a scene that so perfectly and so pointedly captures probably one of the greatest Star Trek moments I have ever seen in another fandom. Now, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen this episode yet, you really, really should. Now, this is the climax of this episode, and regardless of the plot, all you need to know is that two people on opposite sides are preparing to push their respective buttons on their respective boxes when the Doctor says to them, "This is a scale model of war. Every war ever fought right there in front of you, because it's always the same. When you fire that first shot, no matter how right you feel, you have no idea who's going to die. You don't know whose children are going to scream and burn, how many hearts will be broken, how many lives shattered, how much blood will spill until everybody does what they're always going to have to do from the beginning. Sit down and talk." Listen to me, listen. I just want you to think. Do you know what thinking is? It's just a fancy word for changing your mind.
I love that.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
It's such a great scene. And Peter Capaldi, I'll never do that scene justice. I just wanted to give a dramatic read.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But now think about this scene with the major players of Voyager instead, sitting around the conference table. Janeway and the Federation on one side, Boothby, Valerie Archer, and 8472 on the other side. Their fingers are on the trigger, their respective triggers. And Janeway says, "One of us has to take our finger off the trigger. It might as well be me." Which gives everyone in the room the time and the breathing room to talk and learn and understand, and most importantly, think and change their minds.
Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you'd like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and for more Star Trek news and discussion, visit trekmovie.com.
On the next Mission Log, Once Upon a Time.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com. Special thanks to consulting producers, Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Schadwell, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi. So Chakotay can kiss species 8472 and there's no problem. I guess Harry getting a tentacle up his nose was just somebody's personal preference. End transmission.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.